All right, so we are live. Quite excited to be here with esteemed panel members. So hello and welcome to all of you for this online session on navigating the global cybercrime landscape and its impact on fintech and financial services. There are just a few points that the attendees, if you can note, you need to enter your name and then post your question. Mr. Cameron, who is our moderator, he will be taking in the questions and from you and ask those questions with our speakers. This webinar is being recorded and it will be published on India FinTech Forum's YouTube channel. And we have very exciting 5 work from home kits to be won from LexisNexis. So be sure to be there. So introducing the moderator for today, we have Mr. Cameron Church, who is the Director, Market Planning, Fraud and Identity at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. We have Ms. Alissa Knight, Cybersecurity and Hacker, a very interesting journey she wants to share with us. We have Ms. Bhargavi Sunkara, who is the CIO Corporate Technology at BNY Mellon. We have Mr. Deepak Sharma, who is the President and CDO at Kotak Mahindra Bank. We have Dr. Prashant Mali, who is the founder of Cyber Law Consulting. So a very warm welcome to all of you and to our attendees as well. And with that, LexisNexis Risk Solutions is supporting this webinar. So, I welcome Mr. Cameron to start with his presentation.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us for this presentation, and thank you very much for the India FinTech Forum for organising this session for us. It's certainly much appreciated. I'm briefly going to go through a presentation today around just some notes and some observations that we see. I'm just going to make sure that you're getting the right display. Hopefully that's the right one. We're just going to go through some brief notes around some of the changing face of cybercrime that we see from a LexisNexis Risk Solutions perspective, and how it impacts various industries across the globe. We'll go through briefly from firstly a pre-COVID. Obviously a different world, that as we knew it just a few months back in 2019. The world was a very different place, and how we transacted online was very different, especially not only in our own respective countries, but how we transacted with other countries, from within our own borders. For example, cross-border e-commerce. Just some of the highlights there from our cybercrime report for covering the second half of 2019. Some things that we probably would have taken for granted in terms of how the cybercrime landscape is changing, and how e-commerce is changing across the globe. One of the things that stands out the most for me, and which is why it's certainly the first point of the presentation, is that mobile attacks outpaced desktop for the first time for us, and we'll certainly hear from some of our panel members later in the session that around how mobile apps are certainly becoming one of the inroads that that people can use for accessing different services, or accessing whether it be legitimately or nefariously for various purposes. But certainly mobile attacks were on the increase for our network across that second half of 2019. The other, I guess, a couple of other points there, just briefly. I'm quite mindful of time. I'd perfectly honest, would rather hear from the rest of the panel. I think some of their stories are certainly extremely interesting, and they have a lot more insights that they can provide to us. But something else that I'll touch on now is in terms of the cross-organizational nature of fraud, and which is why the report was aptly titled the Fraud Without Borders. We'll go through some of the examples from the European region, but we'll also go through an example from the Asia Pacific region of the nature of that cross-organizational global fraud that we saw across the entire network. So just briefly before I go into those network frauds, I'll talk a little bit about how we saw, or rather what we saw of the change within the network and the change of user and consumer behavior across the network that as it relates to how the world's changed since and during COVID-19 across the globe. Across the left-hand side, I think we can all relate to all of those. Whether it be fortunately or unfortunately, we're working from home a lot more, which is a very unique challenge that all of us are having to get used to. I never thought I'd ever use virtual backgrounds in a webinar, but here I am. I think compared to seeing my son's desk over my shoulder, I think you'd rather see the virtual background that I have in front of me, and that's just one of the very things that we've all had to get used to as part of working from home. As far as how we can consume goods and services online, that certainly changed significantly. But what's been brought from that is the opportunity for fraudsters and for cyber criminals to take advantage of those opportunities. Some of us who are working from home may never have worked from home before. Some of us who have transacted online before may never have transacted online before. And they're prime targets for attack for certainly for social engineering, which is a method that's quite universal, or rather global in its nature. It's not something that is only prevalent in one part of the globe. We're certainly hearing stories about it from all parts of the globe and how it impacts customers. But certainly we're seeing those types of fraud activities or rather opportunities for fraudulent activities being picked up by fraudsters across the globe through the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's impacted the online world. As I mentioned earlier, that we've got a few examples of how some connected networks or organized networks are certainly actively pursuing criminal activity across the web landscape, and this is just one example that we have, particularly that targets out the UK and the Americas. But what we can see here from the main group of people, the main groups of organizations, were performing fraudulent transactions across multiple entities, across multiple industries, which potentially put exposure of up to $9 million at the original organization. So the one organization where this all centered around. But then across organizations, there was up to an additional $3.5 million just in a 1 month period. So we're looking in that single month period in that second half of 2019, where there was a potential of $12 million of exposed fraud, or fraud exposure rather, as a result of that organized network. And these organized networks they certainly don't discriminate. They may or may not have been from within those territories that are listed on the screens, but they're certainly not opposed to targeting organizations from outside their own borders. And I'm briefly going to skip across to what we saw across Asia and the Middle East. And while the organization count is certainly significantly smaller than what we saw across the other network, but this is looking at a banking and financial services customers as well, with multiple presences across the globe, but also a travel company and healthcare company in the US that were exposed here as well. We're looking at 200 individual devices that were at one organization that crossed over to another organization, which exposed across the entire network upwards of $11.5 million in potential fraud losses. And it just goes to show that I guess the changing, the overall nature of cybercrime and the changing nature of cybercrime is making it more and more difficult for organizations, to protect themselves from this type of fraud, to protect themselves from this type of activity. Additionally, also protect their own customers as well, not only protecting their customers from being exposed to themselves to this type of fraud, particularly with social engineering and still the classic phishing and phishing attacks are still happening, and they're still catching they're still catching what they want to catch out of that. So it's quite an interesting landscape across the cybercrime world, across what we see from the LexisNexis perspective. And it just goes to show that organizations can need to be prepared themselves, but also the individuals themselves, or we as individuals also need to be prepared as we're transacting online, and how we can best protect ourselves to ensure that we're getting the best value out of the transactions that we're performing, but also making sure that we're not getting scammed ourselves. I'm just going to stop the screen share and just go back to where we were. Okay, just bear with me a moment. Okay, so with that, I'm going to now start to bring on more, the rest of our panelists to chat with us. If I'm not mistaken, we're just going to go through. We're going to go through the group. We'll go through the list of the rest of the panelists in just a moment, and we'll have them introduce themselves. Just give us a little bit of background about where they're from, and then we'll start to go through some questions about that are relevant to them as well. So, Alissa, if you're able to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Cameron. I am a recovering hacker of 20 years. I don't think I'll ever fully be recovered, but I've been doing penetration testing for the last 20 years. Did some incident response and forensics, recently published a book on hacking connected cars, and last year traveled around the world talking about the 30 financial services mobile apps that I downloaded and hacked through hard-coded API keys. So really happy to be here.
Thanks very much. We'll go to Ms. Sunkara.
Hi, Cameron. Thank you for this opportunity. So I am CIO for corporate functions at BNY Mellon. So I have been in software development for the last 25 years, and I have been dealing mostly with app security, application security. But as CIO, I also look at rest of the security trends and threat modeling and various other aspects. And we'll talk more about how I work with my team and how do we prepare ourselves in general to secure and reduce our risk posture.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Next, Dr. Mali, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you. This is Dr. Advocate Prashant Mali. I'm a practicing lawyer of Bombay High Court and owner of a law firm called Cyber Consulting. I've written 8 books in this area of cybercrime and cyber law. And my research in PhD was on cyber warfare and international cyber law. And I keep handling a lot of cybercrime cases. Rather, we handle only cybercrime and data protection related cases in our law firm. And FinTech is one of the vertical in which we are seeing a huge amount of cybercrimes happening, and we are helping the industry, banks, insurance companies, and small FinTech companies, as well as the victims. So, as a lawyer, you get to get both sides of experience. Interesting cases to share. Forget the time. Thank you.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Sharma, can I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Deepak Sharma. As a President and Chief Digital Officer at Kotak, my task is always to balance between risk and customer experience. I think that is one of the big, tough battle that we are constantly into. While I overall look after product engineering, design, innovation, the technology and overall digital channels, products, transformation across the firm. But as I mentioned, I think one of the things that gives me and our team sleepless nights is always to see how do we find the overall fraud, risk, security, privacy concerns impacting financial service overall as an industry and Kotak as a bank, and keep always looking at initiatives and measures to balance this with all our innovation and convenience that we provide to customers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And certainly from from my own perspective, I could spend a long time with each of the panelists, getting their perspective and getting their view on things from from their own experience. But I don't think we have enough time for us to have an endless conversation, although it would be certainly fruitful for all of us, I'm sure. I'm just going to, I've just got a couple of questions prepared for each of our panelists today. And I'm going to start with Alissa. I heard in her introduction that she downloaded 30 different banking apps and was able to hack them, which is, if I'm one of those banks, I would be concerned. But not only are you a published author, but you've certainly my ears have pricked up with that little mention there of 30 apps that you're able to access. Sorry, I think you're on mute.
Can you guys hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got you.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, so it sounds like from Prashant's introduction that he's probably someone I wanted to know about 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, I hacked into a government network and was caught. And things were different back then. The point of hacking was defacing websites. Now, today it's the monetization of data. Data is now worth more than oil. And recently, a very large CDN released a report stating that more than 82% of the traffic on the internet now is API traffic. It means that more than half of the traffic on the internet is not human to application traffic, but application or device to application traffic. Things are changing, and I believe we're in an API first world now. Much to your point, last year I downloaded 30 financial services mobile apps and I reverse engineered them. Each app took me about 8.5 minutes to reverse engineer and decompile. And in every single one of these apps, I found hard-coded API keys, credentials, AWS credentials, API tokens. And these are large banks. These were not small community banks. We are making the same mistakes that we were making 20 years ago, just repeated. Now it's targeting of APIs. I believe that that's the future of breaches is, hackers go where the money is, and the money's in data, and APIs are serving that data. And if you think about it, APIs are the plumbing system for our financial services and FinTech mobile apps. And unfortunately, a lot of developers, especially the ones I've spoken to, don't realize that you can actually decompile mobile apps and you can find all of the keys and tokens that they're hard coding in the apps. We need to shift security left and make sure that security is implemented in the development lifecycle instead of waiting until it's deployed. So, what happened was I was able to successfully identify and find the API tokens for over 30 financial services companies, banks, P2P money transfer, stock trading apps, all within these apps. And I did it in about a week. So I was able to hack 30 financial services and FinTech companies in less than a week. So it really underscores the devastating point that we're at right now, where our financial infrastructure is very vulnerable. If you go to my YouTube channel, anyone watching wants to go to my YouTube channel, there's a video up there where I hacked a very large European bank through their API server. I was able to transfer money to and from any bank account I wanted. I was able to change the PIN code of any Visa debit card I wanted. APIs are not being properly secured, and I believe that that's where things are headed. The number of mobile phone sales are going up while the number of laptop sales are going down. Everyone is using their phone now. When you want to bank online, you don't think to get out a clunky big laptop. You think about getting your phone out. Everyone's using mobile apps, and hackers know that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I was frantically writing down that I must check out your YouTube channel certainly after after the presentation. And certainly just looking through some of the questions from our audience that we'll get to, once we get through the panel questions. There's certainly some example questions in there that I think you'd be well and truly placed to certainly answer. Thank you very much for your perspective and your insight there. Yeah, extremely fascinating. I'm just going to move on now to Ms. Sunkara about to discuss some of the challenges that your organization sees and how they go with respect to digital transformation and combating cybercrime.
So I really liked Alissa's point about shifting left on security. I have been a big proponent of DevSecOps. So basically, back in the day, it used to be like after you have completed development, you would put in a request, and security team used to do the scans through various tools like Barcode, Qualys, or Nexus IQ or Artifactory X-ray, whatever are the tools that they would like to use. And then you would kind of have vulnerabilities identified. Then you would kind of figure out, how do I remediate them? And there was someone monitoring those and stuff like that. This point of left shift is extremely relevant. And this is what every bank has. Any product development company or any fintech ought to be doing, and probably are doing to some degree. But I want to say that, so how does that change? So even in the IDEs now, you have an opportunity to see vulnerabilities as you are typing in your code. So that is the first step. Second step is, as part of your CI/CD tool chain, you have an ability to do differential analysis, which is real time. And if you don't have tech debt, you can also identify some of the vulnerabilities through that process itself. So you have less surprises at the end of it. And then to Alissa's point, I really liked some of the points that she touched, is that like a lot of these are like not first time, like the same kind of mistakes you see over and over again. Input validation missing. 50% of all known defects come from input validation not happening properly. And then the aspect that I totally believe is that security is everyone's responsibility. It is not a chief security officer's responsibility. It's not someone in his or her org, but it's actually every engineer and every consumer, everybody's responsibility. So in that sense, first of all, understand and bring in your awareness and knowledge. As an example, in our company, we will have all developers go through secure development certification, which includes trainings on Pluralsight, which includes trainings on like OWASP certifications as well. And so they need to go through those trainings, and whether or not you build external facing, web facing applications, even for internal applications, you just drive more discipline, or you just code more discipline, if you will. In addition to that, you mentioned earlier, Cameron, about social engineering. So, notifying any phishing kind of emails, or, every one of these, and also like, if you come across and if you subscribe to some popular channels where they keep talking about the latest vulnerabilities, you keep following that, and you also take corrective actions and make sure you educate your peers and stuff like that. So there is, I feel like, and I think earlier Deepak called it out, that there is a cost associated with security, right? So, the more robust you want to build your application, you will go to row level encryption, column level encryption, table level encryption. All of those come with the cost associated with it. So you need to determine what is the right level of defense you are putting in, and do you have an ability to detect should there be an issue happening. It's not like you'll ever have it completely foolproof. Like the whole idea is that you are able to get to the understanding that something is going wrong in your network much before somebody is able to breach. And so that is the level of defense you want to have. And it's never done. Like you have to constantly keep learning and implementing and improving your knowledge in this area. And I haven't had to code for a living for last 15 years, but I constantly keep getting myself certified in secure development. And I also teach on secure development because I believe, like I said, it's everyone's responsibility, and you can't assume that you have to lead by an example. Thank you, Cameron.
Thanks very much for the insight there. Certainly, agree with a lot of the points that you've made, particularly around not having to code for the last number of years as well. That's certainly something that a lot of us can attest to. Dr. Mali, the founder of Cyber Law Consulting, I think your insights will be well and truly heard not only by the audience, but also I'm sure the rest of the panel as well would love to hear your insights as well. I think one of the things that I'm most interested to learn from yourself is some of the challenges in developing the cybersecurity regulations. That must be an absolute minefield in a world where cybersecurity is ever changing, and the role of cybersecurity is ever changing, and how do you anticipate, on top of that, how do you anticipate the laws may change again in the future?
That's a good question. So what happens in this fintech industry, what I have seen as of date is many of these fintech companies are very young. The majority of them have started from startup culture, and everybody wants to save that buck, and they want to invest in the technology where they want to grow, and they don't take that much care of cybersecurity when it comes to cyber attacks or ransomware attacks. So what happens here is the seriousness in this investment requires to be more. And coming back to your question about the cybersecurity regulation, in fintech right now, the regulation which gets applied to the banks and to the BFSI. The regulation in cybersecurity is constantly changing landscape. Now, it may not be to the specific law as such, but there are other regulations from other ministries or other bodies which keep on coming and which affect the fintech industry as a whole. Just to give an example, like there could be a principal law, like we have in India, we have the IT Act 2000, but then we have something called as e-commerce related rules, which have just come in, which will affect the fintech industry. Then we have regulators, which have the rules, like we belong to a particular industry, like you're in banking, then you're banking, the RBI rules. If you are there in insurance, then you have IRDA rules, so insurance regulator rules. So the cyber landscape or the cyber law landscape for fintech industry, because being in the online space, it gets governed by so many other regulators which it actually touches. So if the fintech is touching insurance industry, so it is fintech plus IT plus insurance regulator. If it is looking at banking, then it's fintech plus IT plus the banking regulator. Likewise, wherever the fintech industry touches, that kind of regulations get built into it. But let me give you my experience on this. Like there are a lot of payment gateways who are my clients. Some years before, when they used to meet me, I can give you exact figures. Around 18 of them used to tell me that they have provisioned for paying ransom in their balance sheets. So they're provisioned. And now when I meet in various conferences, now the number has exponentially grown, more than 100 of them, and whether it's payment industry or allied industry will keep telling me that we have provision for paying ransom. Why is this? Well, the cybersecurity guys will come and they take their own sweet time, and the business requires to gear up very fast. So we believe in as industrial risk, and cyber insurance is covering the payment of ransom. So there's another control which they find safe havens in. So ransom is hitting hard when it comes to cybercrime, and then social engineering frauds. which they're not directly as a cybercrime, but there are gangs and gangs operating in certain areas of the country, everywhere across the world, and then they have this call centers based defrauding done of this fintech players. That's another pain point. But the most important which fintech industry should take note of is about the legal compliance. And if they miss on legal compliance, they bring risk to their principals. And principals are the banks, the major banks, or the insurance, or whoever they are attached to, because they are the subcomponent of these larger institutions. So if they bring a lot of risk to these larger institutions, the larger institutions will always think first of themselves and then of this fintech players. So they need to keep that in mind, and provision for legal risk management and risk management in their organization. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your insights. I think it goes without saying that the legal minefield that it is something that can't be underestimated as almost as much as the cyber risk itself. And by it's not only about compliance in my mind, but it's also about what protections do these laws offer, and who are they protecting? They're all designed to serve a purpose, and it's not just for the purpose of, as I said, just to comply with something, but they serve a very strong purpose, and ensuring that organizations are serving that purpose of that law is extremely important. And again, thank you very much for your insight. Last but not least, I would like to open up to Mr. Sharma from Kotak Mahindra Bank. I could ask a number of questions of yourself, of your organization. We've certainly seen, or from my perspective of my, when we were able to travel, of trips to India, and the ground that Kotak was breaking, or is breaking, in being so innovative, is something that was extremely impressive. I'd like to get your insights on some of the trends that you're seeing in the cybercrime space, and and how that goes into, or how that might relate to some of those innovations that you're making, and how do you bring that balance together, as you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think as you do more and more digital, you also get exposed to more risk that it presents. And I think that's one of the things I would say, as a bank with higher digital adoption of customer across segments and across journey. And largely, as Alissa also rightly said, even for us in India, it's not just mobile first, but for a lot of customers, mobile is the only device that they use to connect with financial service. And I think that is presenting a very different challenge of sorts. But before I think I come on to that, so broadly, if I look at from the financial service landscape, I see 4 or 5 major challenges that we see across, irrespective of whatever we do. One is obviously on the overall unencrypted data, because end-to-end encryption everywhere, there are still, I think, gaps that we see. And the second is, I think, the advent of the malware itself, because we start seeing, and as we work with a partner ecosystem, we just realize that this is something that keeps just mushrooming, probably faster than what we have seen the COVID. So much faster pace at which the malware is just going and penetrating. The third is, today, most of the financial services are also dependent on a larger ecosystem of partners, developers, vendors who work alongside banks. And more often, it's not what banks do within, but I think the vulnerability of the third-party service provider, from security to ransomware, that's putting, again, the ecosystem at risk. Spoofing is, again, something that we are seeing as one of the large trends, and the data manipulation. So largely, if we look at it, these are the variables that we look at, we control as an organization or as an enterprise. But I think when we start looking at from a customer lens in India, and I think that is some of the worry, because irrespective of howsoever strong we build our ecosystem, obviously when, like Dr. Prashant Mali said, when we work with payment gateway providers or various payment ecosystem, we do look at obviously right from checksums to payload encryption to tokenization to see that how do we manage these transactions. But when you look at from a customer today who is using mobile as the device to connect with the bank, I think the single biggest cause of fraud in India is social engineering. And I think this is where we realize that customers, they fall prey to various phishing and vishing sites. They end up giving their passwords, OTPs, probably whatever you ask, they just give it. And it's not that we don't educate customers. I think as a industry, all of us, we keep saying that don't share SMS, don't share passwords. But I think for us, we still have OTP is one of the second factor that is prevalent in the industry. We haven't moved beyond probably a mobile OTP as a second factor authentication. There are risk-based authentication and step-up authentication in place. But again, the fraud risk management engine along with the authentication, again, needs a constant upgrade as we look at the fraud. I think the other one that we are seeing in India is largely the compromised device. Because as the mobile is the only device, a lot of customers inadvertently, they end up installing certain apps, which are either stealing their data or credentials. A lot of them, they end up downloading apps like AnyDesk or TeamViewer apps, which takes the remote control of their device. And once the device is compromised and the fraudsters have access to that device, whatever you do on the device, everything is accessible to them. And I think that is, if you ask me, is the biggest risk that I see among all the frauds that emanates in the banking industry. Identity theft is another one, not still big enough in Indian context, but is becoming reasonably one of the areas of concern. And I think these are some of the things that I would say we can keep looking at. How do we identify malwares on the device and decide not to let the apps open up, or probably have only limited services, or how to block the jail-rooted devices. Because today, even if you find a lot of operating systems that some of the phones they sell in India, they do not use the normal Android operating system. They have their own variation on top of it. And I think moment you have those permissions which can be removed, or probably you see a lot of stuff which is happening through SIM and device farming, and some of the sophisticated frauds have started to happen in terms of how they steal credentials and identity. So the whole fraud landscape, I think, is moving much faster, and it needs a much larger collective effort, right from cybercrime experts to sharing of information from all the participants of the ecosystem, and obviously the experts around to see how do we keep always be alert to this threat and just keep raising this whole bar without compromising on customer convenience.
Thank you very much for your insight there, Mr. Sharma. I think that's certainly customer inconvenience is something that I think we it can be taken for granted in some respects, but I think now with the rise of in some geographies, particularly with the rise of virtual banking, digital wallets, e-wallets, etc., it's just becoming easier and easier for the consumer. If they're not happy, they'll simply move on and move to another provider quite easily, or just simply start using another provider as their preferred service. It's so easy for there's so much choice for consumers. Not only here in Australia, but also, well, particularly in India, there is a lot of different providers there. Okay, now we're just going to move briefly on to some questions that we've been getting from the audience, and thank you everyone who is providing the questions that we've been getting. There are quite a lot of questions as I scroll through some of them at the moment. We're just going to pick out a couple of them, and we'll do our best to get the right panel member to respond. And I think we have, certainly from the questions that we've been getting, we have the right panel members to answer those questions. I'm going to have a guess here and say that this first question maybe for you, Alissa, with around how can developers of mobile apps, especially Android, create more secure apps. What are the top steps to increase mobile app security?
Yeah, so from my research, I was actually very surprised to find out how many financial services companies were not doing code obfuscation. There's a way to actually not prevent, but at least make it more difficult to decompile a mobile app. There are several solutions that you guys can go out there and grab. There's free solutions, there's commercial solutions that will allow you to actually obfuscate the code in your app. Now, it's not encrypt the code, but obfuscate the code, which again, obfuscation is not encryption. So it is possible to do it if you give enough time and effort. But it does definitely help make it a lot more difficult in order to be able to reverse engineer an app. The other thing I'd recommend is organizations are using the wrong security tool for the job when protecting their APIs, meaning that a lot of organizations are actually using web application firewalls to secure their APIs. Bad idea. It's the wrong tool for the job. When you have things like broken object level authorization, BOLA vulnerabilities in APIs, and I see someone in the audience recommended everyone go take a look at the API security top 10 from OWASP. The number one vulnerability on there is BOLA, and it's broken object level authorization. Just because I'm authenticating as Cameron doesn't necessarily mean I should be authorized to see all of Cameron's data, right? So, there's a difference between authentication and authorization, and that needs to be implemented. One of the biggest vulnerabilities I find when hacking banks or fintechs is there's authentication, but there's no authorization. Yes, I successfully authenticated with the right username and password, but should I be authorized to grab everything from the database? Those are the kind of things you need to think about. Shift left security, like Bhargavi mentioned, if you can, shift security left and find the vulnerabilities and write more secure code before it's even developed and productized, the better. We need to do static and dynamic code analysis. We need to hack our own networks. We need to hack our own apps. We need to hack our own APIs before the bad girls do. And, we always want to try and find the vulnerabilities before the enemy does, right? The other thing is, not only just all of that, but know what you've got out there. One of the biggest concerns is that the average organization now runs over 600 APIs. I've run into some companies that have over 1,000 APIs. We're in an API first world now. Organizations need to know which API endpoints are out there running, which ones are facing the internet. You need to create an asset catalog of all your API endpoints, and there's API security solutions out there that are capable of doing that.
Thanks very much, Alissa. That was extremely insightful, and I think with especially in geographies where the rise of open banking is taking place, that only
Cameron,
is just something that we.
I would like to add a point to what Alissa
Sure.
was talking about. One of the things that I have noticed that people forget to do is especially third-party dependencies, right? So you might secure your part of the code, but you haven't done a good job of understanding third-party packages that you're including in your code. And sometimes the third parties that are open source, they themselves publish known vulnerabilities. And if you're not paying attention, then what will happen is a hacker already knows how to hack into that. And then they use that because you haven't updated the latest patch on it or whatever to be able to hack into your system. And this has really happened in one of my previous companies, where there was a software that was no longer being used because it was replaced by a newer software. And so this was sitting idle on our infrastructure, and it had a third-party open source software. And so, and it had a published vulnerability that was used to actually create a DDoS attack. Fortunately, the scanning was happening often enough to determine that there is a DDoS attack, and we were able to isolate that host. So the reason I bring it up is, again, the whole aspect of ownership and accountability that security is everybody's responsibility cannot be overemphasized here. I think it's important to make sure if you're not using some of these packages anymore, you are kind of cleaning it up, and you have, as a CIO or CSO, you have control over all of your repositories that you have. So when there is a package that has a vulnerability, you can apply the patch across all the dependent applications. So
yeah, I agree.
Thank you very much. As the next question I'm going to put forward to Dr. Mali. There was one there, it was around, sorry, I've just lost it. Apologies. Okay, here we go. Why are Indian banks, especially its employees, not aware of cyber laws or IT Act 2000? Interesting question, that one.
Yeah, so Indian banks employees are aware of it. It is not that they are not aware. There is a lot of, I think, internal training which happens, and even in induction training, they have been taught. It is up to a particular employee and his attitude to handle a grievance when a victim comes before him. So if he's showing some degree of annoyance or some degree of ignorance on his part, it could be very person specific. But in general, Indian banks, because we have the largest banking kind of environment here, and the amount of frauds also are tremendous. Different types of frauds. Whatever you see everywhere in the world, it's there in India. Some even originated in India. So bankers do face a lot of kind of frauds, and they really, now they are aware. I could say after this, my Information Technology Act 2000 is finished almost 19 years of its life. And now, even if you don't want to get aware, you get aware because of the amounts of frauds bought before you. And but yes, training is always needed, and updation and training is a constant process. And I think we also lack in this awareness part. India is huge population, huge users, huge amount of frauds. Daily we have some new kind of fraud which keeps popping in. There's new idea to a different fraud which is happening. So this is a continuous learning process.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm glad Prashant brought that up. One thing that I'm finding pretty systemic across different industries is organizations are budgeting to send their entire workforce to cybersecurity awareness training, like what's ransomware, what's a spearfish, but they're not budgeting to send their developers to secure code training. There's a lot of organizations that I've spoken to where, they have in-house developers, they are writing in-house code. They have in-sourced the development of their mobile apps, and their developers aren't being trained on secure coding. And but they're being sent to cybersecurity awareness training. Organizations that are writing their own internal code, that have their own internal developers, they need to send them to secure code training. I'm glad Bhargavi brought this up, and I think she mentioned that she goes through this as well. The vulnerabilities need to be stopped during the SDLC process by writing, hardened, more secure code, so they don't make their way into production. And the only way to do that is to train the developers and give them continuous training to be able to write more secure code.
Yeah, I mean, I can, from a vendor's perspective, it's certainly a question that we're asked regularly is how how secure our code is, what are our processes around ensuring our staff are trained. It's certainly something that is a regular question. Something as well, which is we also get asked, and I think I'm going to open this up to the rest of the panel just to get their perspective on it. One of the questions that we were asked was, what are the possible areas for fraud in fintech using digital platform, and how to avoid? I think the person asking this question is looking for examples in in KYC and identity related scenarios. It's certainly an interesting, interesting question. But I'd like to get some of the other some of the panelists' perspectives on that one.
Yeah, I can take a shot. So I think especially when we look at a lot of fintech solutions, as we see around here in India, a lot of these companies are at a very, very early stage of building a business, and they haven't really thought through end-to-end, say, encryption of their code. They look at a lot of APIs that they consume from other partners. In a lot of cases, these are banking APIs, which is around payments, which is around refund, which is around lending. The way they implement those are some of the gaps. Today, also, one of the big risks that we see here is on the data and privacy side. While we didn't speak much about data privacy in today's session, but that eventually is, as we spoke about the identity theft and social engineering. It's also because a lot of customer data gets leaked, and this data is available with fraudsters. And fintechs have to look at it, because when we look at KYC or onboarding or securing the customer data, the way either the data is encrypted, it's masked, it's shared. A lot of these solutions are also implemented on cloud. While cloud is secure, but the way we do the hardening of the environment on the cloud typically is again where there is a fair amount of risk about how the data is moved to the cloud and is accessed. Again, a lot of these solutions are digital first. That means the form factor is either through apps or through browser or through third-party ecosystem. That's some of these are like on Google or Amazon, Alexa. And so again, how the exchange between the ecosystem that is not managed and controlled by fintechs becomes a point of vulnerability. So I think just like any institution would look at it, I think when fintechs are looking at a solution, again, the data privacy, security are as important as any large enterprise would be. And each of the vulnerability, as I was talking earlier, also applies to any fintech.
You're exactly right. We may have a few more minutes for a couple more questions. I'm not sure if the how are we going for time. I think this is quite an interesting one and could open up a fairly healthy discussion. What cybercrime guidelines do entities like Paytm, GPay, PhonePe, BharatPe follow, if any?
I would say maybe PCI.
I would hope PCI, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope, you would hope. I know that's a U.S. standard, but hopefully, you've got a separate cardholder data environment, and that's one thing we can definitely probably talk an entire hour about. Excuse me, is the prevalence of flat networks and making sure that you have implemented microsegmentation on the network. Even after the Target breach, years after the Target breach, we're still seeing companies with flat networks where the point of sale systems, the systems responsible for transmitting, processing, and storing payment card information is on the same network as the rest of the systems. So for example, recently I hacked a bank through the CCTV cameras in their parking lot. And this was, of course, an authorized pen test. But it was the only reason that I was capable of doing that was because their CCTV cameras were on the same network as their banking systems. So this is a real problem. And hopefully the companies that you mentioned are doing things like network security or security architecture, where we're starting to get away from this flat network approach where all the systems are on the same VLAN and on the same network and reachable. that we're starting to implement what's called microsegmentation, or SDP, which is software defined perimeter, where you can't pivot around the entire network from machine to machine because microsegmentation has been implemented. So that is a great way to secure your networks beyond the security controls we mentioned on the endpoint and on the network, where if those security controls fail, you can at least relegate an adversary to a specific machine in a specific part of the network, and making sure that they can't pivot around.
I think certainly that agree that that's something fundamental that that needs to be uncovered, and it's a little concerning that you're able to, albeit through an authorized pen test, able to get into a bank via their security camera network. That's that's a little concerning. But anyway, I hope, and for their sake, that they've closed that that gap. I think we might have time for a couple more questions. I don't know if we have. I think some of the participants may have gone into providing some feedback, but if for those who are still online, we will be posting a link to provide some feedback to today's session. It would certainly be extremely helpful certainly from our part to get an understanding of how valuable a session like today's is, and more insights from the audience on what other content or other topics you'd like covered potentially in future webinars. So any and all feedback is certainly welcome. Okay, this is going to be an interesting one, I think, for you, Alissa. I think the question here is, and you may have, I think actually you've covered quite a lot of it already, but if there's any other tips that you can provide, I'm sure that the audience would like that. The question is, what are the best practices to be followed to block the API attack?
Yeah, so I think a lot of mistakes are being made in how to secure APIs. A lot of organizations are even relying on API management solutions that offer security as a feature to secure their APIs. And I've never been a fan of that. To me, security shouldn't be a feature. It should be built from the ground up. And so organizations need to look at API security, API threat management solutions that are designed, purpose-built, and designed from the ground up to secure APIs. That it shouldn't be a feature in their management platform. It shouldn't be a web application firewall. Those are meant to design, WAFs are designed to protect against a different kind of tactic and technique in compromising web applications. API endpoints need to be secured differently. There's different API security threat management solutions out there, security solutions out there. You have passive, you have active that sit in line, that interdict all API traffic going to and from the endpoints and take action on it. You have ones that are shift left and sit in the IDE, as Bhargavi mentioned. Those analyze the code in the IDE as the code is being written. My recommendation is it should be both shift left and shift right security. Make sure that there's something that you send your developers to secure code training, that there's something in the IDE to analyze the code as it's being written, and then something to interdict and inspect that API traffic once it's deployed. Make sure that you are cataloging your API endpoints, that you know what's deployed out there. When you have hundreds of API endpoints, you run into the problem of shadow IT or shadow APIs. It's really easy for a developer to deploy an API endpoint into production and not realize it's internet facing and open the network up to compromise breach. So those are my recommendations. Of course, hire hackers, hire penetration testers to hack your APIs, to perform static and dynamic code analysis, to hack your mobile apps, and make sure that you find those vulnerabilities before adversaries do.
Very sound advice there. Thank you very much. this, I guess, would be certainly a broad question to the rest of the panel as well. How do we counter the problem of anonymity on the internet? How do we know where cyber attack originates, and how do we track them? I think that's certainly an interesting question, and one is not only from a cyber attack perspective, but also from a consumer perspective. Anonymity on the internet is certainly something that's well publicized and well aware. Most internet savvy users are aware of keeping themselves anonymous on the internet. So an interesting question, and certainly something that would love to get the panel's perspective on.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in here, but obviously there's Tor nodes, or individuals can use a Tor browser to browse the internet anonymously. Obviously, Tor nodes are not completely anonymous and completely secure. Whoever's in charge of the Tor node has access to figure out who's hitting them. The problem with adversaries and adversarial analysis and identifying the true identity of an adversary when they've compromised a network is a lot of times they're not using Tor nodes. A lot of the times they're actually using compromised systems that they've already breached. And it's usually a domino effect of different compromised accounts and different compromised systems. So it's really difficult to figure out in today's world who an actual adversary is. I've done a lot of incident response and forensics in my lifetime. A lot of the times the advanced persistent threat attacks like APT actors are typically nation state. They're typically very well funded, very sophisticated, and typically working as part of a nation state. There's no prosecution there. You don't have a company that's going to go out to, China or North Korea and try and prosecute someone for, because they figured out the true identity of a North Korean that just breached their network. That's not going to happen. Typically, when you're pursuing someone legally, pressing charges, having them arrested, you figured out who it was, is typically because of an insider threat. The employee internal to an organization was caught as part of a breach. That's when I've seen prosecutions. But when you're trying to identify the true identity of a hacker on the internet, in 2020, it's going to be very difficult. And you also have to deal with things like, country to country extradition arrangements. There's no extradition arrangement between Russia and the United States, or, I don't know what extradition alliances that India has with other countries, but there needs to be extradition laws there. So, I just think it's not going to happen when it comes to an adversary. Certainly you can pursue an insider threat. You figured out that an insider was involved in the breach, you can go after them. As far as anonymity is concerned of your average user on the internet, you can use VPN proxies like services like Hide My Ass and other services like that. However, be very careful, because a lot of those VPN services, consumer VPN services, their servers are located in Eastern Europe. Their servers are located in hostile nation states. You don't know where your data is going with those consumer VPN services, so be very careful of using them. But aside from that, you have obviously Tor nodes, you have Tor browser. There's other privacy services that you can subscribe to. But again, a lot of those servers for those anonymous browsing services and consumer VPN, you don't know where the servers are located, and you don't know who's in charge of those servers. So something to keep in mind. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you very much. I think that's probably all we have time for today. I'm going to pass back over to Rennie to wrap up the session today.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, speakers, for sharing in your very insightful session. So I thank Ms. Alissa Knight, Mr. Cameron Church, Mr. Deepak Sharma, Dr. Prashant Mali, and Ms. Bhargavi Sunkara for joining us, and all our lovely audience. And there have been a lot of questions and interactions going on. So we will be sharing all these questions with the speakers so that they have a chance to go through it. And I thank all the participants who've been here. I hope you had an amazing and engaging time. And last but not the least, I would like to thank LexisNexis Risk Solutions for supporting this online session. And going forward, if you wish to conduct any webinar, please feel free to get in touch with us at info@indiafintech.com. And with that, have a great day and a great week. It's been lovely hosting you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.